So, thank you for inviting me to speak and to talk to Parham, with Parham, about his fantastic show here at Workplace Foundation. We've had a really good conversation in preparation for this, so we're hoping to share with you lots of thoughts and ideas that Parham is bringing to the practice and is generating through the practice. So we realised we've known each other for about 3.5 years or so.
Yeah, almost 4 years.
And so I've been aware of your practice and the developments in it for that length of time.
Yeah.
But I notice here there's a new kind of addition in this show, which is it's somewhere where we thought we'd start was thinking about the drawings, and then we'll move on to thinking about the paintings and so on. So this kind of new addition, could you tell me about what you call the drawings in the show?
Yeah, so I think I was kind of trying to. It initially started with trying to bring something from my background to this solo show, which my practice, is kind of rooted somehow in the graffiti as well. So there are some references, and I was trying to bring something from there, and it was also, I was trying to borrow some elements from the paintings, because whether it's a horse or fire or all the symbolism here, you do find it in the painting, so it's kind of borrowed from the paintings. It's not a standalone thing, and I was kind of trying to kind of challenge these white walls a bit. There's a play with distance of the audience and the works as well.
Because you were talking about the relationship between you and the drawings and the paintings. And those things.
Yes, it's the drawings. It's kind of strange because I don't make drawings as a finalized piece of work to make drawings. I make drawings as a plan for painting, so it's planning for painting, and then there are moments that I'm done with the painting. I've finished the painting, but you have a dialogue with painting, and this dialogue has ended from your side. You don't have much more information to put on the canvas, on the surface, but you feel like there is still information to receive from the canvas. Like the dialogue is still going on from the other side. So you kind of I do this a lot, that I have like these postcard sized papers all around the studio that I pick them up and go around, and when I'm done with the painting, I go around and kind of collect forms from the painting. I pick out the details and capture them, because the painting is still giving me information. And it's a lot. I mean, it's a very common thing that artists stare at the paintings without having physical activity. Just you stare at the painting.
So much time is spent looking.
Yes, it's when the painting is giving you some information, and probably you're kind of slowing down to make slow, quiet decisions for the next move. Maybe you're considering what you need to do later. What's your next step? And so I have this relationship with drawing and painting, and what was happening here, which I was very happy with, was that these are drawings in large scale, and then the paintings in smaller scale. To see the paintings, you need to go close, but to see those drawings on the walls, you need to go back. So there's this. It's very playful. You need to go back and forth to experience the space. So it's a very dynamic, very animated experience, I would say. Even though the works themselves are static, it's just sitting there. But experiencing this space is a very, very much animated experience.
So there's a kind of shifting that's going on the surface of the wall between the paintings and the surface, and then a shifting of the body through looking, moving backwards and forwards.
The painting is. I think painting is, it's embodied. Yeah. It's not an illustration. it's not an illustration in terms of you're not there trying to illustrate something. It's embodied. There's a physicality to it.
I guess that relates to what I just said about the body moving in and out. Yes, because you do think about that way that there's such a physicality and that surface value.
So you're kind of, the painter is actually leaving a trace on a surface. Oil paint is minerals and soil and whatever, and it's mixed with linseed oil and wax and other mediums, and so you're leaving a trace. It's like a footprint basically somehow. So you kind of and when you're painting, you're kind of adding stuff in there, and you're poking at the canvas, and you're just leaving some qualities on the surface, and you're leaving different qualities on the surface. So it's these surface values are important as well. So you kind of I personally, in my paintings, I'm leaving antagonists and protagonists on the canvas, different qualities that kind of contrast, and I saturate the qualities on the surface to also get the eye involved, and
I think that's something that's so important about the work and seeing the work firsthand is that surface quality.
Yes.
Just said it earlier, the incredible texture that the paintings hold, and the change in texture across the painting, which then you talked about in terms of using mediums, so linseed or wax, encaustic wax paste, and then some areas are just with terps, so you've got these differences of surface value, surface quality, and that evidence of your hand having made that too.
So that's the thing. So when you see the images of the painting, you're not experiencing the painting. You're experiencing references to the painting. It's not the painting. That image is not the painting, and you need to experience painting by actually going around and see the painting, the actual object. This. And the thing you say, like different textures, I use a lot of wax in my painting. I use it a lot, not in every painting, but I use it a lot, and it's such a there is a real joy in the material, just making that material and experiencing it. Like when you mix wax with these really like a pure color, like these warm colors, especially like you especially see it with the pink. When you mix that, it looks so edible, and it looks so erotic, and it looks really attractive, and so there is a pure joy in that, and also it's also about it's very thick, and you kind of get that in a lot of these paintings, that there is a very thin layer, then it gets thicker, and then you have wax, and so you have you have something way in the front, and you have something in the middle, and you have something way at the back.
And this is happening not on the surface, but also in the composition, isn't it? So you kind of got this twofold tonal recession or distance or something like that. It's interesting that there's two things happen in the painting. I think first and foremost, painting is about perception. So you're seeing it. So these qualities that you see matter, and you need to. It's about the history of painting and the language of painting. How to get the eye involved, basically. So that's what I mean when I say antagonist and protagonist. So you make a surface, you introduce a surface as something wet, then you introduce a surface as something, dry, and you introduce a surface really solid and hard, and you just introduce something squishy and edible, and so it's about that's what I mean by antagonist. So I start with the subject, and I have the antagonist to it, and I build around it, so it builds up on the qualities
to kind of, get the eye involved, and it's, explore the, perceptual understanding of your existence, perhaps.
It kind of reminds you about being alive, doesn't it? Looking at a painting reminds you of a person who's made it, a person who's applied something and considered different aspects. It's,
Which is what all Cézanne's doubt is about. You kind of experience your existence through perception. You are experiencing existence by living your body and living your life, and you can see your environment, you can see yourself, you can see you're part of this environment, and so it's a very existential way of understanding yourself and your surroundings, and it's which also comes with a lot of anxiety. It's also about anxiety because when you see yourself and you see your environment, it kind of blurs the boundary between you and your surroundings in some ways, because you're leaving trace as well. And also, it's also it's also about this anxiety of, I see something, I cannot paint it exactly as I see it, which is what Cézanne was worried about for years and years in front of that mountain, just constantly painting the mountain. And there is a real question that I cannot paint the sensation and experience as I am actually seeing it and experiencing it. And what is wrong here? Is it me, or is it a human being, or what's wrong here? So it's a very real question about existence and understanding your existence.
From the pursuit of the trying, keeping going and repainting.
Yes.
And that the thing with Cézanne, that kind of being in the landscape, like he talks about germinating, or maybe it was Maurice Merleau-Ponty, he talks about germinating in the landscape. The paintings were, Cézanne was as well, this thing was developing within a space. Maybe that brings us on nicely to these kind of the kind of content that's in the paintings. And this thing of where these kind of subjects, these maybe motifs, or these things in the painting come from.
That's a very
how
interesting.
They come together.
So I have this ridiculously vivid imagination that just streams ideas. It just doesn't
I think that's
stop.
really evident.
It just doesn't stop. I never struggled to paint about, I never struggled with subjects to paint.
Wondering what to paint.
I'm never worried about that. It happens out of nowhere. Because not just as a painter, as an artist, but as a human being, you're constantly receiving information, right? And maybe as a painter, I'm just more sensitive about it. I try to sometimes curate what I receive, right? So as we all do, we read books and watch films and all this stuff, and different ways, channels of receiving information. And So I'm always receiving stuff, and I'm always thinking about them, and I always have these ideas, and I write them down and make drawings, and so I always have ideas. It never stops. But however, when I'm painting, I'm not thinking about any of the subjects. I'm thinking about the language of painting. When I'm painting, when I'm putting the brushstroke, which goes back to the same thing I said, it's embodied, it's not illustrated.
Yes,
so it's being embodied, the painting is being embodied, it's not illustrated. So I'm not thinking about, I want to paint this table. I'm not thinking about the subject and the content. I'm thinking, so each brushstroke is a little idea, it's an epigram, basically. It's
this idea, the epigram.
It's a little idea about color, light, shape. It's an epigrammic idea. It's not a giant epic idea, it's a very little idea about language of painting. And maybe that's why also I make drawings to plan for the painting, because I know that through the painting I won't think about the subject.
Yeah, because you talk about having like a kind of idea for the painting, this constant stream of imagery, which we'll talk about soon about where that stuff comes from. So you've kind of got something, because one of my questions was like, how do you start this work? How does it get going? So you've maybe got something that starts you off. Yeah. And then you're kind of in this reverie or this sort of responsive place.
It's usually like I've been reading something, I've been watching something, I've been thinking about something. Something is worrying me maybe, and I feel like maybe I'm just interested, just a personal interest that I want to paint about or associate myself as a person. Associate myself with it. It's just interesting to me, and I have that little idea, and which has some qualities, right? And then it depends whether it's a landscape or whatever. There will be different steps to it. So if I'm going to start with a landscape, obviously I'm going to start to paint with the sky, and from whatever is at the back of the painting and come forward. So because I think there is an alphabet to painting. If you want it to work, if you want it to work as a landscape, you need to start with what is back there and come forward. So there is an alphabet to this language, obviously. And even if you're going to break that alphabet, you need to have reasons, obviously. So I start in those steps, how these layers must come forward to stay untouched. You start with bigger decisions, right? The sky, the background. You come forward, and as you go forward, your decisions narrow down and become little, and at the end you're just intensely adding a little bit. So it goes on like that, and
so do they kind of form? Thinking of the paintings that are around us here, do you have a kind of sense of some elements, some things that are going to be in it, and then maybe suddenly some kind of elongated heart appears, or some other split or fire or something happens. So
I start with little things. Although I have some idea what I want it to be, I have some desire for it to shape it. But what happens is that so I start with little things and add antagonists to it. But then and I do make quick sketches at the first with loose paint and turpentine and just a quick compositional structure for it. But then something really ridiculous about it is that I usually stop halfway through. Like what I want the painting to be is way more maximal than what it is, how it ends up. There's so much more to it. There's interests and things that I want to put in the painting so much, and then I start to paint and I start to form it, and then I reach a level that I feel like, even though I could go further and exhaust it, and this, painting has this sandbox mode to it that you can go on and on and on, and you can exhaust it, but I feel like it's enough, it's working, it's already making sense, and it's enough, right? So I stop halfway through almost all the time.
Nearly with every painting.
Yes.
So what do you think that is about, that kind of maxing out, the idea of that you want the painting to kind of hold everything?
Oh my God, I think it's because. Probably because I think it's rooted, where I've been raised and where I grew up, where I was born and how I was raised. So I think it's because of my, I grew up in Iran, and Iran has a long history of struggle and famine and everything. So there is this survivalist working class mentality that, and you either have everything right now, or you might never get it. There might never be a tomorrow for it, right? So there is this working class survivalist mentality that I want to tell all the stories right now in this single painting, because there might not be another painting. I need to constantly remind myself, like consciously remind myself that just chill out, just chill out.
There'll be another painting
There will be another
that I can put this other stuff in.
Yeah, this MA painting program is going on for another 6 months. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So I need to just remind myself that if I push it too far and exhaust it, you know, it will be just too much. It will just ruin that joy and that satisfaction and that sensation.
And the kind of interplay of things that are going on in the painting. It's like you're like in your imagination stripping back whilst applying paint. Isn't that interesting? Kind of taking things out of the idea as you're applying content. Almost.
Yeah, because go on.
Because that's what's so striking about these paintings is this kind of relationship between the things in the paintings and the we've talked before, I know, and you know, thinking about these paintings here, this kind of where the eye is going, where it's going in, leading, where the eye is being led, where it's journeying and exiting, maybe all those things. And when you've got so many things in the painting, maybe there's a kind of
it becomes so
it's lack of maybe true perception.
Easy perception. Especially, like, you know, the paintings are quite small, most of them, and you know, if you're too much into that, it distracts the eye and it becomes messy. And we want things to be in order. Because I mean, I have this obsession with order and reason. Reason. Right? Which again, I think it goes back to my experiences with Iran, because I have experienced what would happen if you put reason and order into sleep. I know what monsters it could produce, and so I have this obsession with, you know, being very clear with everything, planning everything. Even though I keep space for doubt and changing direction, the painting, obviously, I'm responding to every brushstroke. That's what makes painting critical, comparing to a lot of other mediums. But I'm also, you know, I need to make sure I slow down. I need to make right decisions, slow decisions, reasonable decisions for every brushstroke. So I can explain it for you why that brushstroke is over there for every one of his paintings. Why was the intention? What was happening? Right. So I have this obsession for reason and order, which is a very reasonable obsession, actually. Right, because I know what happens otherwise. If that makes sense. Yeah, it does.
So about the subjects then, where they come from.
It's the oldest painting in this exhibition is from February 2019, which I was reading the book Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher, and I was getting this sense from this book, that this sense of you know, Mark Fisher talks about capitalism and liberalism, and he's talking about it in a way that you know, he says that capitalism, in order to capitalism survive, it constantly needs to produce disaster, and you get this feeling of conspiracy theories and all those ideas. And I was thinking that I was really interested in that book, and I came up with this idea of, you know, maybe I would like to paint this sense of a passive, non-place, abstract space where there is a table and something is being planned on it, something theoretical is being planned, a disaster is being planned, something is being modeled on the table. And there are no figures around, because it's a very passive, previously activated space, that the ideas are formed, tested, and now those figures, those people have left to execute those ideas, maybe. So there's this kind of strange, really passive feeling to it, and so it was so specifically about those paintings at the beginning. That was the idea with the tables, and I was painting, like, you know, this fire being simulated, this prop fire, this sense of threat, there's something disastrous is going to come up.
It's happening in this contained space.
Yeah. Yes. So there was this idea, and it goes on, and I was painting diagrams. I was painting this type of stuff, like something is being explained. Diagram as painting, painting as diagram, which again goes back to my obsession with science and reason and order. Like diagram is trying to explain something clearly, but then in the painting nothing is being explained actually, it's so absurd.
Which is something else.
Another theme that is explored in the paintings, that, these decisions that I'm making are very serious, and I know what's happening, but a lot of people, in daily life we might define absurdity, humor, jokes. We might define these terms as the opposite of being serious, while the idea, the philosophy of existentialism, the idea of absurdity or the absurd or humor is such a heavily loaded philosophical term. It's such a serious subject. It's a very serious subject. What is humor? And I think to me, humor in these paintings, this absurdity that you see around, is also in my life generally, humor is this self-defense mechanism. And I've noticed it, like, it doesn't mean I'm not serious.
Because they're intertwined, that's what we're talking about, isn't it? Like this kind of conjoint, serious, silly.
Yeah, it's seriously ridiculous.
Yeah.
Or ridiculously serious.
Yeah, which I know we talked a bit about before in the context of contemporary philosophy and metamodernism.
Yeah, oscillating between the two, and
paradox of two different things happening at the same time.
Yeah.
I think that's
like a pendulum. It goes back and forth, and I would love to. I usually, in my writings, like when I'm reflecting, I usually describe it as this love and hate relationship. You constantly go back and forth in a love and hate relationship, which is not just in the paintings, but I'm actually living this relationship with a lot of things. I think, and when I explain it to my friends, they all say they have the same kind of feelings. I have this love and hate relationship with my nationality, with the nation that I come from, with Iran, and with a lot of things. We have this. So it's the same with the painting. I think it just leaks into the painting. I think that there is this love and hate relationship in there. There's this paradox. There's this humor. And
you can hate the painting,
you can. Yeah.
Things can go wrong.
Yeah. Oh my God. Exactly.
It doesn't sit right. It doesn't go on right. The colour's wrong.
It happens a lot. It happens a lot that I'm painting something, then I'm so frustrated that it's not getting anywhere, and I just put it below the table not to see it. Then I put the table below the table, and then it's just
table below the table.
Yeah, it's a painting of a table below the table.
The table.
Yeah, and then I go back to it in a few months or weeks or whatever to kind of further it and see if I can find a solution. So it is a love and hate relationship basically. Yeah, it is.
But going back to some of the things in the painting, and you were talking about arrows just now, I think you mentioned, and I was interested to hear that some of your background is in thinking or studying engineering, mathematics, and I can see we were talking about life cycles and kind of journeying and making sense through things being led, or your eye being led around the painting.
So I got my diploma in mathematics and physics, and back in Iran, it's not an Iranian thing specifically. I'm sure a lot of families are like that. that they expect the child to be engineer, doctor, lawyer. It's artists are amazing, but not as my children. So there's this idea of trying to protect the children. So I got my diploma in mathematics and physics, and at the time I was thinking about studying chemistry, engineering, and working in the oil field. It's just, and then I went to the art school, and even when I went to the art university, I was studying engineering, printing, and media. It was about bridging graphic design and printing industry. And then when I came here, I started to study fine art. But from the beginning, from when I was 12, 15, I have this background in graffiti and street art and vandalism and all that kind of stuff. But which is a paradox itself. But so I have this obsession and this background with with being reasonable in math, and this I have this background, definitely.
Because we were going to talk about, we can't not talk about colour.
But
we've been thinking about the colour in relation to some of the things that you're interested in. But I don't know if you want to talk about that kind of acidic. You mentioned acidic, intense, kind of so heightened. Incredible colour alongside darker spaces, moodier areas.
I think if in the older days, like I don't know if for example, like one of my influences, like Caravaggio's paintings, the color scheme is what the nature has to offer to Caravaggio, and he heightens the contrast, obviously. But if that's coming from nature, to me, the color scheme is provided by animations and cartoons and
but that's
the
really,
digital space.
You've got a really wide knowledge about that kind of the graphic arts and the cartoon and animation, haven't you, from the early days?
But cartoons, I mean, like all the way from Max Fleischer and 1930s all the way to the contemporary ones. And obviously, as the more current it gets, animation, the more the colors are saturated and everything becomes really wild and psychedelic. And a lot of my contemporary influences are also deeply rooted in animation, like New Leipzig School of Art. They like Neo Rauch and Tille Baumgartel, and for instance, specifically they used to also borrow a lot from video games and comics and stuff. And like a bit, if we go a bit back, like Harry Hu collective of 1960s in America, Chicago. So it's a lot of my a lot of the colors are borrowed from animations a lot of times, and also, my generation, the new generation is growing up with tablets and in front of TV and with internet and everything. So we're constantly seeing these color schemes and way more than nature. And that's where it comes from. But also, I'm also very much interested in color palettes of socialist realist paintings and posters as well, which is also a whole other conversation we could have. That's where the colors come from. But when I'm painting, again, these are the influences. When I'm painting, I'm not thinking about these influences. I'm thinking about what color would work in there in the painting. What needs to be there. What needs to be there, not what I want to be there.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that responsive.
There's an ocean between these two. What I want and what I need. I'm not trying to do what I want in there. I'm looking for what it actually needs to be there to work, to so it would guide the eye and get you involved a bit more.
I think that's so interesting and important in painting, this kind of this intention you might have, which some painters maybe it starts with colour, or it starts with a kind of sense aura or something, or a thing that you're going to put in the painting, and then it's like when that, or a photograph, and it's when the kind of intention or the subject matter starting off point thing kind of leaves or doesn't, and then the responsive kind of relationship kicks in.
So it's interesting because so it kind of goes back to the idea of perception, because it's first and foremost you're perceiving the painting, and which also what bounds us. I mean, what bounds artists to non-artists. It's so the painter is perceiving and trying to paint it, right? There is a process. So Cézanne's doubt is basically about this idea that I'm trying to, transfer my sensation experience from existence onto canvas, and how could I make sure it actually happens, and how could I make sure the audience actually receives that, right? It's about contemplating this idea. And also, that's what bounds the artist to non-artists in terms of, we all perceive, we are all trying to, first and foremost, understand our existence through seeing, right? So it's that's where the artist and non-artist bound to each other, and that's where I think the sociality of painting kicks in, maybe.
You've talked a lot about that before, do you want to say something about sociality?
Because when you walk into the studio, when you're painting in the studio, you're into, to me it feels like the studio is like a materialized version of your own mind. Like you walk into the studio and you're in this isolated bubble, forming ideas and doing stuff. And there is little sociality to it, I would say. It's very isolated.
Very isolating kind of experience, isn't it? And I don't know about you, but when you first start being a painter, you're kind of not aware of that. Exactly. Although you've maybe spent your youth painting in your bedroom or whatever, then you go into uni or whatever, and you realise actually you still need, even though you've all these people around you, you still need this kind of isolation to make this kind of work.
So it's necessary to make that painting to work and contemplate the painting.
The sort of work that you're making.
But then I'm always thinking, how could painting, where does the sociality keep in? When does it become sociable? What are the limitations to it? How sociable could it become, right? And I'm always trying to test it, see how could that work, and what are the borders to it, what are the edges to it, and I'm always so this in one layer there's sociality to it, because perception is this idea that we are all experiencing existence through perception at some level. So there is something to talk about that. There is something to contemplate, and we're all here to see things, right?
And I think the paintings are in their kind of radiant colour. And I wanted to talk about Marx as well in a minute, but the content of the paintings is kind of, certain things are kind of known, and then there's an ambiguity, and there's an interest. There's something that brings you to the paintings. And it could very well bring a group of people to the paintings. And in a way that's sociable, isn't it? It's kind of the paintings that want to seemingly generate an audience, be looked at, be engaged with, be considered.
Things to look at. You have organised things to look at, rather than something chaotic, right? And I'm thinking, and then I'm very interested in socialist realism, which also influences the color palettes a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in that. Not in this. It's not necessarily Soviet socialist
And that was
realism.
something you wanted to point out.
Yeah, because when you say socialist realism, the first label that is attached to is Soviet socialism. Socialist realism, a painting that is concerned with sociality and reality, has existed way before the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So, and I'm very interested in how painting as a vehicle could, could mobilize society as well, right? So, which is about testing how sociable painting could get, right? So that's one layer. That's another layer to it. But then, back to the going back to the, Marx and making Marx thing you said.
These marks kind of in some of the paintings, these especially I keep obviously looking at Spectre behind you there, which are, and some of the others are more recent paintings in your studio we looked at the other day. This painted mark that's kind of like string or exactly. It's got a kind of presence of a thing.
Yeah.
It's got this kind of quality of an object. So
Yeah.
we're using the paint and the brushstroke to make a thing. That's something more recent in the practice.
Yeah, I would say. Yeah, it's interesting because Henry Matisse has this quote. I'm just paraphrasing. He says the same way that a person could take on different roles and play different characters. The same way an object could take on different roles in different paintings, and a brush stroke is a thing itself.
Yeah.
It has physicality, it has material, it's a thing itself. So, the brush stroke could take on different roles itself, maybe. Yeah. You put a brush stroke, it's an idea about color. You put another one, it's an idea about shape. You put another one, it could be an idea about light and shadow and color value and whatever. And so, in some of the paintings recently, the brush stroke itself is becoming...
It has an agency.
It has an agency, it has a character to it. It has a personality to it.
And that's what, when I was thinking about the work, getting ready for the talk, I'm thinking about this kind of gooiness of some of the marks, or the hacked onness. Yeah. That especially that one behind you with the fist.
Oh my God, yeah.
And then this kind of horrible, sick, goo thing that's dripping. And how incredible it is that you get this mean feeling like this from the painted mark. That's pretty powerful, isn't it?
It's interesting the specific reference you brought up. When I add wax to it, wax to the paint, it kind of blurs the. Kind of pushes the painting towards the experience of sculpture. Yes. It kind of blurs the line between painting and sculpture, because when you add waxes, it won't be fluid anymore. It won't move. You cannot move the paint around easily. It won't slide, and so it becomes sculptural. And it also, interestingly, you will increase the control over the paint, over the material. So it's kind of also, you're more in control, and maybe it's again maybe to my obsession with being in control of the situation. Putting things into order. Boxing things. Structure, categorizing. Just
the way that so many things are propped, things are kind of sitting on. Pointing, pouring out, there's a kind of sense of control, and then there's this allowance of paint to do what it needs to do, or what it can do on a surface, which I think something we talked about was these these rather lovely kind of backdrops to some of these paintings, and we were talking about the way that in a lot of them there isn't kind of a definite horizon. You talked about non-place, non-space, and I remember I was thinking about this kind of green screen of like videos, how you would take a film. So
it looks so, everything looks so staged, which also, it's not just in terms of subject matter that I'm like talking about Mark Fisher and all that stuff, like the disaster being planned. It's just beside the subject. You know, if you think about the history of painting, all through the Renaissance, painting was this beautifully constructed lie. It was this beautifully constructed window to another space, right? So it was staging a window. It was a fake window, right? So it was being staged. A reality was being staged, right? Which is the I believe it's the fundamental difference between Western art and Eastern art. Because Western art, you have this, you know, beautifully constructed space in front of you. The space is in front of you, right? It's a window. But in for instance, like Persian miniature or Indian miniature or Japanese miniature, if we go towards the east, these illustrations are, they have isometric sense of perspective to them, meaning that you're looking as if you're looking from the viewpoint of the god, as if you're the god, or you're because you're different. Your distance with everything in the illustration is the same, so you are everywhere in this illustration. You see everything in the illustration. You're everywhere, and you're part of the space. You're a part of that space as the audience. You're not in the space is not in front of you. You're part of it. So it's a very different way of experiencing your existence, I would say, through perception, right? It's a very different notion of existing and perceiving, so it's I think painting is, especially talking about oil painting and classic paintings, you know, painting is this thing being staged, right? And I was kind of being, you know, playing around this idea that something is staged again, but there are references that breaks the fourth wall, and you know it's staged. We will not be fooled, as if you're the director of that film that is happening, that thing that is happening. You're the director of that event.
Who's
you know,
you the painter?
You the painter, you the audience. Or maybe I'm reminding everyone that this is a stage. This is a, you know, breaking the fourth wall, letting you know that don't believe whatever you see these days.
And
which
could happen.
Which might, I don't know, you might be able to link it to the idea of fake news today. Like not everything you see is real. A lot of it is staged. I think there was a very good quote from Mark Twain, I think. He said, oh God, I can't remember this exactly, but it was something like, truth is more stranger than fiction, which is very true these days. Like, it's ridiculous, like a lot of crazy, absurd things are happening around us.
And that, going back to some of the things you said at the beginning, this kind of political awareness, homeland and here and other places in the world, you kind of, these things are kind of embodied in the painting.
Yeah, I think, so you know, it's, you know, as just like anyone else, I'm worried about things. I follow the news. I study about it, and it's kind of, you know, these are all materials to paint about. I don't want to struggle with subject matter to paint about. So I kind of just bring in all these interests. But again, like when I'm painting, I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about the language of painting, I would say, or in another way, maybe I'm thinking about painting as this vehicle to kind of carry those interests.
Yeah.
But again, if you don't know how to ride that vehicle, it won't work. So you need to be very aware of the language of painting and the history of painting and the traditions of painting. And you need to stand up on the shoulders of the giants. You cannot do it all by yourself. If you want to use a material that has a tradition to it, and you don't want to acknowledge that tradition, why would you use that tool anyway? Go use some other tools.
Well, this is an important thing to think about in contemporary painting.
Oh my God, yeah.
In the developments that we've seen in painting over the last 40 years or so. The way that the work kind of contains that investment in looking at historical painting.
Or at least I'm trying to do it, because it's a very strange context. It's so the way we are studying painting here. I mean, I'm not talking about East Europe and Asia and all those other places. I'm talking about here right now. The way we learn painting is not through sitting around the studio, around the master, and everyone copying the still life or whatever, and the master going around and teaching everyone. It's not like that. So we have tutorials with the tutor, and then we have to study in our own isolated space. So the way I'm learning these traditions and histories is a very archaeological experience. I'm digging deep through these history books, bringing out things. And just like archaeology, you will never manage to bring out the whole thing. I don't have such a training, right? So I'm picking out traditions here and there, which again goes back to the idea of metamodernism as well. I'm picking out things and trying to use these archaeological artifacts that I'm discovering from history of painting, I would say. So it's a very strange archaeological experience to learn these traditions today in such a context.
But brought together with some of those maybe more contemporary,
obviously,
cultural.
That's because you that's the thing. So you won't get all those traditions and histories completely and comprehensively. There will be gaps and voids that you will fill them with whatever you have around yourself. You're experiencing around yourself. So it becomes a very contemporary, very current, very new thing. And maybe that's even better than having that whole thing from the history, because if you're trying to copy and produce something that has been done before, you're basically decontextualizing it, because all those classical paintings were made in a specific
time
context.
And a developmental response to what had gone before.
So if you're going to produce the same thing and copy the same thing, you're decontextualizing it. And decontextualizing something, if you take something out of its historical narrative, you're kind of distorting it. And when you're distorting it, you're devaluing it, basically. So it might be actually a better approach to have this archaeological experience. That you get what you can understand and what you think you need, you borrow what you need, and then fill the gap with other things.
Which kind of speaks of an atemporality, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Kind of pulling in from various times and different traditions of painting.
And it again goes back to the metamodernism. It oscillates between two things, and it goes back and forth, and
that kind of that opposition.
Yes.
Or the multitude of things, but then everything is bouncing off each other.
In there. Yes.
So going back to the socialism, the sociality. You talk of it like the sociality of painting, which I think is a really interesting word. That to describe what you're talking about. I think almost because we've thought about this before the talk, but I think sitting in here in the space, there's some kind of social thing happening with the paintings. They're kind of talking about the bounce. They're kind of radiating and bouncing around with each other. And then going back to the things we're talking about at the beginning, this kind of explosion that's happening on the walls with the drawings. There's kind of things that make me think about relationships and between paintings, between the painting and the wall, between me and all these kind of activities that are happening in the room. But this is something that you want to pursue, isn't it? It's almost like a quest or some sort of. You've written about this.
So I think it's so there is definitely a sociality to painting, and it goes back to the idea of how the individuality, and on what level this individuality should be, on what level the sociality should be. And especially that in the academia, I'm experiencing this a lot, that people, like art students, kind of bank and invest on just personal emotions to paint about. They just paint about like what they feel, and kind of you cut out the social part of it, the sociality of it. It becomes this individualist practice, and the problem with that is that so painting is this live medium, right? When we say it's embodied, it means that you are kind of recording all the time that you are painting, right?
So in that way, it's temporal.
It's a live medium. You're kind of recording information through the time. You're stretching the time. So. It's exactly the opposite of photography. Photography is a slice of a time, right? But the painting is stretched.
Records it.
But so the problem with banking and investing on your emotions as a subject of painting is that feelings fade away super quick, because feelings and emotions are results of these, electric pulses in your mind and chemical interactions in your body that could be different from minute to minute, right? So painting is not even actually the right medium to capture the feelings and emotions, basically, right? So from experiencing the painting as a final product, you obviously get some feelings and emotions, but it's not for recording all those emotions you have doing the painting. And you cannot force yourself to constantly feel love or hate or whatever when you're painting. You cannot constantly force yourself to feel. So there is this it's not really, there is individuality to it, but onto a certain level, and there is sociality to it on a certain level. And I think it's a matter of kind of exploring to see how far each could go and
the balance.
Maybe balance it.
So I think this thing, it's something that's kind of, I know in my research it's coming into, that there's very much a kind of dialogue or something within contemporary painting that is deeply psychological again now. So people are kind of painting from a direct psychological position, maybe about something of their own psychology, but it's how that's fed into the painting and how it's kind of collectively received. I know we talked about kind of a kind of collective reception, because it kind of needs to speak to an audience, doesn't it? So I think when it works, it kind of allows the receiver to bring their things to the painting and meet what's being shared with them and kind of collectively understand something about the human condition. So I saw a really great show in the Hepworth recently by Christina Quarles, and she contemporary painter from America, talking about living in a body and painting from her own position. And she's talking about her psychology, but looking at it, I could feel a kind of an understanding of being a person. So I think that's when it kind of works well. But that's in a way there's a social element, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely.
So
There's definitely a sociality to painting. It's not this isolated thing happening in a cave. That's the thing. I maybe my interest with, social realism, maybe my interest with New Leipzig School of Art, and New Leipzig was this product of DDR and East Germany and communism, which is a bit problematic because now they are the superstars of figurative European art.
Yeah.
How does that work? But maybe my interest with these things goes back to the idea of sociality.
Yeah.
That how could you, in what directions, on what levels could you push the sociality in painting, right? And also, like, just speaking of New Leipzig School, maybe my interest with them is that I see echoes of my background in their context as well. Because, like, I was always interested with them that, oh my God, these guys grew up in DDR, they experienced that atmosphere, like they are the children of revolution and blah blah blah, this romantic ideas, right? But then I was thinking about my own background, and I was thinking that I grew up in Iran, a revolutionary state, a failed revolutionary state basically, and I have experienced being surrounded by propaganda, which how art started for me basically. I stepped into the realm of art and creativity by, consciously deciding to do it. We all do paintings and drawings when we are children, but we're kids. But consciously stepping into it was when I was trying to respond to propaganda and the brutal environment that I was surrounded by in Iran, and I was kind of, my appropriate response at the time was graffiti and vandalism and street art and those type of things, and
which I guess was external as well, in the space, in your kind of surroundings.
That was very, that was a very social thing. That was a social comment on the urban environment, right? So I had this, like, maybe that's why I'm interested with New Leipzig School, that, like, this, this context, this background. But then here, what's happening here is completely different from that. Even though the only similarity between them, I would say, is the tool, the spray paint. But
which is how you've made the drawings.
The drawings. But this is, I don't see these as graffiti, to be honest.
You don't. You see them.
No,
as
I see them as drawings with spray paint. I'm not. So because it's a very different context, I think if you take the context of, I think graffiti back when it's in the street, it's called graffiti because it's challenging that authority, and it has that context. I think if you take that context from it, not everything created with spray painted on the wall is a graffiti.
No,
I don't see it that way.
There's that transition that's happened for you in the work that you make from that kind of you mentioned vandalism and kind of spraying on the wall in your kind of surrounding space to then working on a stretcher, having the work in a gallery in this kind of institution of the gallery space, and all the kind of history and the dialogue around the white cube, or you kind of disrupted that, haven't you, I suppose, with this happening on the wall, in which you've almost brought something of previous experience to this, but in you're seeing it through a lens of a contemporary artist and thinking of it as drawing.
I'm not ashamed of my background and what I've done in my previous practice. I'm not resistant to it. I'm just I feel like that was the right response in that context, it's not the right response right now, right? So it has, and also I'm not interested in producing graffiti anymore, but I'm very much interested in writing about it and reinterpreting what was happening, and which I'm doing. I'm writing on this subject, but and I have upcoming projects about it, but yeah, and obviously I have these skills and these ideas and these tools. I have these tools that I can bring to the context of painting. And there are different ways of painting. Obviously, there are different ways of painting, perceiving and observing, even though to each of these ways there's a good observation, there's a bad observation, there's accuracy and inaccuracy. But there are different ways of painting and drawing, and perhaps having spray paint and spraying paint could be a way of painting, maybe, if it's contemplated and if it's the right reason, it's in the right moment and right time.
The setting. And
the setting. If you stage it properly.
Stage it properly. Staging, which is what you've kind of done here. You've staged this. If
you stage it properly, it could be a part of painting, obviously.
And I think that's what's so interesting about the work is there's a kind of staging and a falling away or a disruption or the paradox between something quite formed and something giving way or allowing a space of interpretation. Okay.
Was there anything else?
I don't know. I think that's. I don't know how long we've been going for, but I think we've covered the things we were thinking about talking.
Fantastic.
So I don't know if anyone's got questions.
Come on, ask questions. Otherwise, I won't be paid.
It's a psychological space that you talked about. I love the way that the graffiti sets one layer of that, and the space within the paintings is another one. And I've been looking at all these skies, thinking, "There's no clouds. This isn't like Manchester."
Oh my God!
Is it? You talked about being a digital space and related to media and animation and all that. But is it also? Do you think you talk about the orthographic perspective, and I feel like the kind of architectural elements within that sky, the tabletops, they feel like that kind of space. Is this the space of Iran, or is it?
That's a very good question.
I'm interested in that.
It's
obviously you talk about Western art all the time. I feel like there's some other dynamic. Where is this space? It's within the net, but
I could talk about that on so many levels. There is this famous thing about Manchester that there are only 2 seasons in Manchester. It's either July or it's raining.
And you were just saying on the way over, we got out of the train station and it's not raining here.
And I was like, oh my God, yes, amazing! It's just windy. The weather is obviously, it's an interesting question, because if I show you the painting that I'm working on right now in the studio, it does have the grey, cloudy skies now. It's kicking in now. But what are these skies? These are not skies. These are backdrops.
These are like
backdrops of. That's how I wish the weather was in Manchester. It's not the actual sky. But like for instance, that that painting over there, the sticks in that spring kind of. You can feel the fresh breeze of the morning in there. That was like when I was really missing spring in Iran. Which later on was picked up by an electronic music band in New York, and it became the cover of their album, which they're Iranian American. The trees, the sticks, and at the edge of the spring. You can see the wet grass in there as well. So I don't know, as a person who has spent 21 years in Iran, and the springs in Iran are very special, and I do kind of miss that weather, but we have bigger problems to be concerned about right now with Brexit and everything. We have bigger things to be worried about rather than the weather. But yeah, I think it's just something that, you kind of miss the sunny weather, and maybe it kicks in from there because we are all hostages of us, our time and circumstances and our context. So you cannot escape that if you miss the spring and if you miss the sunny weather, you cannot weather that, you can escape that feeling, it will kick in somehow.
So with this painting, do you think that initial intention was,
that was the beginning of it, basically.
It was, yeah.
But then those sticks don't have much to do with it. So that was the beginning of it, but then the painting is basically about perception, because you see something, you see below of something, you see the above something, you see something in the front, you see something way at the back. So it's about looking. That painting is about looking, not spring. Spring is just an excuse to tap into the subject, maybe, to tap into the painting, maybe, to tap into that, mood and just finish, just go on, and just an excuse to finish the painting, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of those kind of layers, like seen beneath the surface of the ground, kind of fake ground, and really like this cut out fire with an edge, like it's like cardboard or something. It's an illustration of an object or a thing which you can't really describe fire. I think it's great how there's like layers on layers.
That's the thing. That's the great thing about painting, that you can have so many layers to it. Right, but also in that painting you see an object that is holding its own weight, like the roots. It's holding itself.
Yeah, you can play with everything.
There are so many layers to it, and I'm sure if you bring in someone who knows psychology, they would say things about these paintings of my personality that even I don't know, maybe, you know what I mean? So there are all these hidden layers, and obviously...
From your dreams? Do you use your dreams?
Oh no, not from dreams really, no. I don't dream. Don't dream. I don't know, I just don't usually... my imagination is so vivid, there will be no term for dreams. It's just, I dream in reality, I'm dreaming in reality. So it's just, I don't know, I've never thought about painting dreams.
I think about the paintings kind of hold an unconscious.
Because
they hold it, the unconscious is present all the time.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of in the work, but you don't have to describe it or explain it away. It just kind of helps the work.
Exactly. There's definitely a lot of stuff in these paintings that it's just, definitely. I'm trying to be in control. I'm trying to put things into order, but obviously, a lot of things might be happening that I'm unconscious of.
And the time frame for all the work, you said it all started in February 2019, the first one.
Yeah.
Do you work on loads at once, dipping in and out of it?
I use a lot of cicative, which is a drying agent, and I just use a lot of that. And because I use turpentine a little bit, I don't just in the first layers maybe. So I use a lot of linseed oil. So I need a drying agent to make sure it dries. And I paint. There are usually 8 paintings, 9, 10, I don't know, something around there, like some numbers of paintings around the studio that I go in between them and just work on them. And
And when you turn to one painting, do you just think about the story or whatever's emerging in that, just responding to that painting at that moment?
No.
It must be really dangerous to carry ideas between them.
So that's a very interesting thing you said, because I usually think that, you make bigger decisions as you go towards the end of the painting. You make little decisions, slower decisions, smaller decisions. So if I've made a terrible mistake in the first layers and I wasn't aware of it, or I dismissed it for whatever reason, and I went towards the end of the painting, I don't go back to clean it up and make it right. I try to make it right in the next painting. So there is this idea, I have this idea all the time that maybe I feel like I'm painting the same painting every time. I'm just trying to do it better every time. There is this weird idea to this painting.
Yeah, these two, right?
Yeah.
They're both a fire, a scene, a stage.
Yeah. I have that weird feeling about paintings that I'm constantly trying to do it better every time. It's the same painting. It's just being done better. I try to further it. You know, there's this strange idea to painting.
Is there a relationship to? You talked a little bit about the psychological kind of underpinnings, potential psychological readings of your work.
Yeah.
Psychologists came and they reveal certain things. I'm very interested in, obviously, having worked with you and written your the press release for the show, the little bio, which is a kind of very compressed history of you. And I can't escape that when I look at your work and I sort of think about what I would consider to be a very traumatic experience. And now here you are making work. I won't see all of them in relation to that, and I think that I just wondered about that. I mean, if you experience it like that or not, because in a way, maybe it's just a normal.
No, that's true, because it's back in there. It doesn't matter what class of the society you come from. It doesn't matter how rich or poor you are. It doesn't matter how educated or uneducated. Back in Iran, the moment you step out of your house, you risk not coming back that night. It's a ridiculous place. Iran is this really crazy place these days, and crazy stuff might happen. And just by anything has a high risk to it, like any decision you make out there, right? And we all know it's all over the news. I don't need to really talk about it. So I've been having all of us coming from Iran have been having traumatic experiences with a lot of things. So there is definitely this trauma, and that's why I said maybe humor is, to me humor is this. There is a real function to humor. It's a self-defense mechanism. I don't decide to make a joke. You know what I mean? I don't plan a joke. I'm not a comedian. It's not a carrier for me to sit down and write jokes. I don't come up with jokes and humor and absurdity in the paintings. It happens because the moment I drop this, just even in the real life, when I drop my sense of humor, things become too much to cooperate with, right? And I think a lot of people are like, you don't necessarily need to be Iranian to like that, but I don't decide to, have humor. I decide to be serious, but I don't decide to be humorous, and it's a ridiculous thing, and it's more of a, I've always find the myth of Sisyphus a very easy example to tap into the subject and talk about this, because Sisyphus is punished by taking this stone up the hill and then again and again, and there's absurdity to it, but what's interesting is that he protests the absurdity by continuing it, not by resigning, right? So I see the act of painting similar. You every time which goes back to the same thing you asked. Like I said, like I feel like I paint the same painting over and over. It feels like I'm carrying that stone like Sisyphus every time to the top of the hill. Each time better than before. There is this absurdity, this kind of this sense.
Because you never do make the same thing.
No,
I don't copy the painting in the same way, because I think that devaluates the painting. But no, I'm just saying it's a nice metaphor to kind of tap into the subject and talk about absurdity and humor in painting, right? I'm not saying it's exactly the same. I just find it.
The problem is you couldn't.
But Sisyphus tried to push that boulder up in those different ways.
Yeah,
So it's kind of the right
Yeah.
metaphor, isn't it? But the way that you've thrown yourself into contemporary painting and the art school and all this kind of dialogue and discourse and investigation is kind of dealing with, in some way, the trauma or moving away from
definitely.
the trauma.
You know, we are all subjected to the time we live in. I cannot escape that. I cannot escape the fact that I'm Iranian. There might be another pole to it that I go back and forth, because to be honest, I've always terribly felt outsider even back in Iran and among Iranians. I'm not this fully Iranian person, you know. That's not the only thing I am, right? So there is another pole to this pendulum, right? So there is definitely trauma in there, but it's not all about the trauma. It's not. I'm not just Iranian. I'm more than that, right? That's the thing. There is trauma, but it's not all trauma. I'm not this traumatic. Just, you know, it's not that. Yeah. What's your question?
I was going to say I like how you display real problems in the world in cartoon.
That's an interesting thing, because aesthetics do go back and forth between cartoon and realism. Which goes back to the metamodernism again, like the aesthetics of, you know, the paint. There is a sense of lighting and shadow and texture, and, you know, there is a sense of realism, but sometimes it fails, sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it works, sometimes that part is saturated, sometimes it's more realistic, and then on the other pole is that it's this graphical kind of 2D flat kind of space, and I obviously look at video games a lot. I find it interesting, especially like, you know, video games from the like 1980s, 1990s, and then they were remade today, and how this graphics suddenly, the transition between the graphics, like something completely 8-bit and 2D and flat, and then you have this 3D, three-dimensional, really well rendered space of the same game. So how does it? So I find that very interesting to look at. I mean, we're all surrounded by video games these days, so it's an interesting thing that's oscillating between the two aesthetics. But sometimes, you know, each of them could be more saturated each time, slightly. Yeah. Anything else? Please.
I was going to say that a lot of paintings, you're painting looking down.
Oh my God, yeah.
There's quite a voyeuristic approach there.
Yeah.
And I was wondering also about the filmic angles within the work.
Yeah.
And there's so many questions there. And also the fact that quite a lot of them feel like dated sci-fi.
Yeah.
Is there those sort of influences in the work as well?
That's a very interesting thing you ask, because like I usually have paintings on easel, and the paintings are really low, so I'm actually looking down at the canvas, and the painting looks like a toy, or looks like a book, or just an object that you can pick up and look at. So that's a very interesting thing you mentioned. Sometimes I look at the painting as if I'm this god modeling this world in there. It's an interesting thing. Maybe it's because of that. And
I wonder what would happen if you put your canvas up high.
That's the next thing I'm going to do. Yeah, that's the next thing. I get back to the studio. I'll put the painting as high as I can.
In your studio right now, you've actually got paintings on the wall like this.
Yeah.
So you're painting on the wall as well, aren't you?
Yeah. But
have you noticed there's been a change in the voyeuristic or the angle of the activity that you're looking on?
Yeah, exactly. Because the paintings now that I have, it's more in front of me rather than being close. Yeah.
It's a really good point.
Yeah, that was a good observation. Yeah, that's probably the reason, and also the subject matter that I was thinking about. You know, you always look down at the table. You're never in the same height of the table, obviously. So there was this idea that something is being modeled. You always look down to model it. So there was this idea as well. But the painting was also really low when I was painting it. So yeah, makes sense.
Really weird question. The diagrammatic kind of landscapes, do you think of layer cakes? You know, like rainbow cakes? Was that in your mind at all? Because I keep thinking of those cakes. You know the ones I remember?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's highly intense colours.
Yeah.
Since I was a kid, I remember I really liked these diagrams and these illustrations of Star Wars books, that like the concept books of Star Wars film, and there are diagrams of spaceships, and this is where the engine is, and this is. So I really like the diagrams always, and it also goes back to that obsession with order and reason and science and mechanics and this type of stuff, that everything needs to be explained and everything needs to. So when I came here, brought the paintings and we wanted to curate them, I had this obsession. Miles, remember, I put the paintings with table on one side of the room, the paintings without the table on the other side. I had this obsession with categorizing and boxing it, right? And then Miles came in and he was like, "No, what are you doing?" So there was this, you know what I mean? So maybe because also it's also because I'm joking, I'm exaggerating obviously, but there was I had this maybe it also is because of the way I was thinking about it initially at the beginning, was that so the paintings, so if you see each painting as a dialogue, so the dialogues were done for me, the dialogues were ended for me, right? And I was we humans are the only creatures on planet Earth that we archive things to feel like now we know it, now we know what this is, now, and we're done until the next generation comes and discover this and reinterpret them, right? So I have this idea, maybe I had this idea with the paintings that so these paintings are done and they are going to be archived and documented through the show, and then we will be done with them. So we put the ones with the table here, with the ones with the. So I had this archival approach to it. Maybe maybe that's where all these influences come from with diagram as well. The diagram is that now we know what this is. Now it's explained, and now we know, which is a very humane, basic feeling. Like that's like. The first humans were like, everyone in the cave, what, we don't know what that is in the sky. And then later we're like, now we know what that is, that was thunder, okay, that was thunder, now we know what it is, right? So we have this obsession to know everything, archive everything. I mean, that's where the influence comes from, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not making any sense to me.
But what you then did through the curation,
was to put them again.
You put them back in some kind of
dialogue,
and social.
Yeah, that's what what we did again.
Re-socialise them.
Because it does have a dialogue for the audience.
Yeah, and punctuations.
Yeah.
With things that are similar in some of the paintings and things that are different, like something
oh my God,
kind of lonely.
In
a sense, as in there's nothing else in there apart from this
that
backdrop.
Fake Chicago Bulls hat. Yeah.
Just one question I have. This is your first solo exhibition.
Yeah.
And I'm really intrigued as to how that has changed the way in which you think about your work and think about yourself as an artist, and what that does to you actually.
Yeah. I was thinking about it because this was the first time. So when I paint something and it's finished, and I make drawings or whatever, and it's finished, when I'm done with the painting, I just wrap it in bubble wrap and just put it in the corner. I don't put the paintings into dialogue with each other later on. So it's after this I was thinking that maybe I need to sometimes bring back the works and have a look at them. So like, the painting Mr. Risk-Taker, the guy with the slot machine. So after I went back to studio, I started to again, I brought out some materials from there, and I went back revisiting it and painting it again. So maybe one of the things that I thought about after this was that maybe I need to bring things back and put them in dialogue again, not to recycle, but to just revisit some other ideas and just maybe echo, or I don't know, maybe, but just put paintings again in dialogue together, maybe. That was one of the things that I was thinking about. And the other thing maybe was that, the color scheme in the paintings are usually, there are exceptions, but they're very consistent. And when I put them together, I just again noticed it, and I was like, oh, maybe I need to bring in other colors, introduce other colors to the paintings again. Because when you put them away, you kind of forget how consistent it's becoming.
Well, the Mr. Risk Takers kind of have a different kind of
Oh my
general
God.
palettes, isn't
Yeah,
it? It's
yeah.
more those muddier yellows,
Yeah.
like deeper reds, whereas there's this kind of heightened magenta, lime viridian green, lime green in these. These have got a more digital, I guess.
Yeah.
quality.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you've gone back to that painting.
Yes.
It has another kind of colour sense
Yes.
in it.
Yeah. So it might be, that's one of the things maybe I need to, go back and revisit the colours and everything. You asked so many questions, it's enough.
I was going to say, why is there so much like disaster in not all
You're too young to know that, just sit down. You're only 11. We will have this conversation when you're 18.
No, but it's because like you've got the exploding like the planes and the jets,
Yeah.
and you've got the dead fish and the
dead
walls
fish.
which are on fire,
Yeah.
and like you've got I don't know what's happened there, but something bad's happened. Something bad's clearly happened to those poor creatures, and then you've got the dead robot thing there.
Yeah. Yeah, but I will answer that when you're 18. It involves a lot of adult material. I'm sorry. Later. Yeah. You're 11. You're too young to know that. That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
They really actually look at the work and have
He can't talk for himself. I'm sorry.
It's really powerful.
This is where my Iranian Stalinist thing is coming up. Like, that's enough questions.
It's a really powerful work.
Is it?
And,
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. But you only say that because you're my auntie.
so glad. Yeah.
I will not give you a free painting because of that compliment. Just be aware, just you cannot.
have it when you're young.
Yeah, okay.
When you start, I have it.
Okay, it's okay.
Why, can I just turn that around, maybe ask you, why do you think?
I would say because of the disaster and like the unfairness in the world. Like you've got, you can see one clearly there that hasn't fallen over. It's just stayed there, and then you've got another one that has clearly fallen over. And then like there's no fairness in the world. You've got one jet explodes, the other one might not, and then the
You said very interesting thing, the unfairness, and it's interesting that it's coming from an 11-year-old person. It's amazing that people in your age and you are clearly having an understanding of the current situation. And I really don't know how to respond to that seriously. I don't know. But it's just, I'm so happy that you can understand it. You have understanding of it. It's amazing. I don't know. I really don't know what to say. Should we wrap this up? Yeah? Is that all? Yeah?
Yeah, I think that's
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.